Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and my guest this week is Laura Stine. Laura, how you doing?
Good, Anthony.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really enjoy all my time with you, and now I get to ask you difficult questions.
I can't wait.
I promise they will be very easy. So, your girls, I've known them for a good chunk of their lives, and they're growing up. Did Fiona just turn 18?
She just turned 18. She's a senior at Southside, and she is kids ready to take on the world. She's got her voter registration done.
Wow.
She's ready to go.
Here's why I'm sad that she's a senior in high school. In addition to the fact that it makes me feel really old, I just learned that she is a babysitter, and I now have an 8-year-old in my life. And it's like all the universe came. I'm like, one of the most responsible children I have ever met is now a babysitter who can help me, but her services will be only available to me for a short period of time. I actually had tried to get her as a babysitter, but it's on a night when because she has all kinds of things going on.
She really does.
Yeah.
But you know what the good news is?
What's that?
She has a younger sister who is 13, and she is ready to go. She's been practicing her babysitting for a few months.
Done.
I'm telling you, good news.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's Sid into these days?
Sid is into, you know what? Anything her friends are into.
Okay.
She has a very large group of friends, and
All right.
they revolve through our house.
Okay.
And I'm telling you, the kids of today are an interesting group.
They really are.
They really are.
You know, it's been fun for me, and if this is not your experience, please feel free to refute this, but being back with like kids in my life, I really like it. It's fun.
Yeah.
There are times when it's not. But
Of
there's
course.
like this different energy. Things got real boring for me for those 4 years when I was like, Alex is an adult. I live by myself. And I will reserve the right to retract that statement someday.
Yeah, but, Alex is, he was a special kid. And full disclosure, Alex worked at our company for a summer. And, he's one of those unicorn kids who he's smart, he's bright, he's aware, knows what's going on, catches on quick. All of that. So I can see why things got a little dull for you after he left.
Yes. Well, and I say this, and people think I'm kidding when I say it, but I genuinely mean that what Alex has taught me is that karma skips a generation. I was not that kid. I was the worst son to any parents you could ever have, and he was the best that I could have asked for. So
he was a good egg.
That karma will revisit me in bad ways some point later on in life, but I had a son who did not visit that upon me. So, well, we're not here to talk about the children. We're here to talk about you. So I'm really interested in hearing about your career path because I know a little bit about it, but one of the things I always like about doing this with people I know is I always learn new things. So tell me what you were thinking originally about career, because it's always a mystery to a lot of people when they're young. Were you from right out of the gate, I know what I want to do and I'm going to do that, and that's where you ended up? Or did you take some twists and turns? What did that look like for you?
Circuitous is really what my career path was.
Okay.
And so I grew up south of Indianapolis, about 50 miles, and anybody who knows the hills of Brown County kind of knows where I grew up. So I was kind of just where the land and the topography starts to get hilly. So I was a nature kid. We were outside all the time.
Yeah.
And so I graduated from high school, went to IU, made myself crazy trying to find out what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And at one point, the administration called me and said, we have lost your records because you have changed schools so many times.
Yeah.
So
What were some of the stops along the way?
Oh, the stop. Let's see. Education was one.
Yep.
I was going to do elementary school education. Then I was going to do art education, and then I was going to do interior design.
Okay.
And then I was going to do fashion merchandising.
Okay.
At one point, my parents just said, just please get a degree and graduate. We don't care what you do.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
So it all, as things tend to work out, they do. So I got out of college, came to Fort Wayne, got in a job that I hated for 5 years. So what I didn't realize is the reason I hated it. So I went from being an outdoor nature kid into the mall with big concrete walls and no windows.
No windows, yeah.
And it drove me crazy, and I couldn't figure out why, right? So I met Jeff Markley.
who was our previous. Now there will be a week between these, so you, dear listener, do not know what a climactic statement that was because Jeff was just in the building. But I did not know that you and Jeff worked together.
Yeah,
so
that's so funny. So, long story short, when I had a moment when I was just newly at Fort Wayne, and I remember the moment. I was walking through a native plant nursery. Turns out it was Newhauser Native Plant Nursery up on Stellhorn Road. And many of the listeners will remember that nursery. And I remember looking around and I thought, what are all these plants for? Because where I'm from in rural Indiana, there were no landscape nurseries. There, when we farmed, we farmed big crop fields and vegetable gardens.
Yeah.
So I'm looking around at all these potted plants and I could not figure out what they were for, which is kind of hilarious now looking back, right? So I met Jeff Markley and one day the thought of landscaping came in my head. And I thought, that guy I just met, he said he worked at a nursery. So I went and talked to Jeff and said, hey, could I come work here one day a week? He's like, sure.
So it was a part-time job. It was here's a way for me to be outside.
Get outside.
And get a little relief from the job that I don't like.
Right.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I know. It started as just a, drop of water in a pond.
And quick digression, there's, I think, still a marker for Newhauser on where it used to be on Stellhorn. I think I've driven by it.
Could be.
Yeah.
So, Jeff worked at the new store, the Newhauser Garden and Gifts Southwest.
Yes.
And so that's where I went.
Yeah.
And so I worked there. I worked there for 3 months. I said, you know what? I really like it here.
Yeah.
Is there any chance I could come work here full time? And
All right.
Jeff said, yeah, because we need somebody.
All right. So I always had this idea that you were like from the get-go designer and, had grown up in a meadow with native plants. And so, wow, this is okay.
Right.
So how did you get from this is part-time, I'm going to work here, to you're like the designer for the nursery? How does that transition happen?
So I just started to learn, they were really supportive in my career and said, just learn as many plants as you can.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I just tried to learn as many plants as I can. And within a year, I was designing. Then I took classes while I was there.
Okay.
And about 5 years in, I had been volunteering over at Little River Wetlands Project, which had purchased Eagle Marsh at the time. Of course, at the time it was a cornfield, right? It's not what it was today.
Sure.
So I was volunteering there and working at the nursery, and so things started to form in my head, and I started to learn because out at Eagle Marsh, it's all native plants, and they're creating habitat, and so you're really seeing the interactions.
Yeah.
In a place like that. So I started to look at the plants we were selling, and not only were some of them not native, some of them were invasive. Well, every nursery in town and really all across America was selling invasive plants at that time. So I went to the owner and I said, hey, because the owner really loved nature too.
Sure.
And I said, look at what we're doing here. And he was like, well, yeah, I didn't even notice. I didn't even know that. So they were super supportive. And at that point, then I called Ben Hess, who was the restoration manager out at Heartland Restoration in Huntertown. And I was like, hey, we kind of want to bring some native plants in to the nursery. And nobody was doing that at the time. I said, so we would like to get your take on what you think would work, and we want to. So I partnered with Ben, and we set up. We picked the species that we could sell in the nursery.
Yeah.
And we talked about plant size and tags on them, how to identify them for clients. So we made this really nice merge between native plants in the wild and what they were growing from local genotype seed. Because they were growing the plants in small plugs. How could they get them a little bit bigger so that I can sell them to someone who's coming in and wants them in their home garden, right?
Yeah.
So we did that, and to my knowledge, that's the first time that had happened here in Fort Wayne.
Yeah.
So that was just a really great partnership.
Yeah.
And then and then by then we had interest in starting a Northeast chapter of the Indiana Native Plant Society here in our region, because that's a statewide organization and it has lots of chapters around the state and a big chapter in Indianapolis.
Okay.
So I was one of the founding members of that, and
Okay.
have just stepped off the board from the presidency. But so then we kind of start bringing our people in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
So now there's several native plant. There's several nurseries in town that are carrying native plants,
All right.
and several landscapers who are focusing on native plants too.
Wow.
So it's really great for
Oh,
the
yeah.
local,
Yeah.
for the local area.
Well, that's great. So all this happens when you're at Newhouser, and when did you start your own business? And I want to mention something that we're on a really interesting run here the last few episodes, because this is the Asher Marketing Podcast. But my sneaky little secret is that it's not always full-time marketers that we talk to. We're talking to Laura, who's a business owner. Our previous episode was Jeff, who's an executive director of a nonprofit. Prior to that, it was a woman who works in the healthcare field, specializing in migraine and migraine relief. So it's an interesting run. So we're going to talk about you as a business owner. How did you make that decision to take the leap into entrepreneurship? And was that scary, or were you fully confident that this was going to work out well?
Well, actually, I didn't think about doing it on my own at all. So I left Newhouser. There was a part-time position at Little River Wetlands Project, and I had just always wanted to work there
Yeah.
because I really loved that organization.
Yep.
And so I just didn't want to turn it down. So I had been at Newhousers for 16 years, and I had been, at that point, I was the lead designer.
Yep.
And I was just ready for a change.
Yeah.
So I did that, and then as I was working part-time there, someone just said to me, "But you're going to do my landscaping, right?"
Yeah.
And before I could say anything, I heard the words come out of my mouth, honestly, before I even thought
Yeah.
about it. I said, "Well, of course." And then I went, "Wait, what?" I
Yeah.
think I may have just
So
started
you
my own company.
You didn't have employees to actually dig the holes and
I
plant
did
the stuff.
not.
Were you planning on doing that on your own, or did you say, "Oh no, I better find some people"?
I just did it on my own.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went and got the tools out of my garage.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is that. And so, and then I started to, I was owning and designing and installing and, doing all of it. And then I started getting some people to come and work for me.
Yeah. You
And
realized
then had
how
to-
much work it really was.
Right.
Yeah.
It was. And then, eventually the business grew, and now I have 2 full-time designers. And
And when did you found the business? When did it start?
2011.
2011. Okay. So you're 11 years in now. What are some of the things you've learned along the way? What are some of the things that you've maybe changed about the business? And maybe let me back up for a second. Explain what Laura Stine Gardens is to those who might not be familiar with it.
Sure. We are a residential landscape company, and we are what's called a design build company. So we are 90% of our business is residential. Probably a good 10% is commercial.
Yeah.
And we have a maintenance division as well. But we focus mostly on, we will come to a customer's house, see what their needs are, create a design for it, and then we have a team who will come and install those plants, tear out what's there, kind of what's needed to solve the issues that the homeowner's having.
Yeah, and I will disclaim that I am a one-time customer of Laura Stine Gardens, and the work was phenomenal. Great people, super fun to work with, and transformed the backyard and made it look really great. So what are some of let me come back to the question that I inadvertently asked before I should have asked it, but what are some of the challenges, some of the things you've learned along the way that have maybe made the business stronger, some of the things you've been through that make you in 2022 stronger as an entrepreneur and as a business person?
Mm-hmm. It's as anyone will tell you, it's certainly the people that you surround yourself with. So I've been lucky enough to, my senior designer now started out on our installation team and went as foreman, and so he's learned the ropes as he goes, and I have another really creative designer on the team too. So bringing people in trusting them.
Yeah.
And that is not an easy
Sure.
thing to do for a founding owner.
Yeah.
of
Well,
a
letting go
business.
is hard too, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
letting go is really quite difficult.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've been really fortunate of is that I had experience behind me, but also that I have been the installation team. I have been the foreman. I have
Yeah.
been the designer. So all those things really work in my favor.
Yeah,
when
and I assume out of necessity, you still literally get your hands dirty. You have to actually
I
do the
do,
work
yeah.
from time to time.
I
Yeah.
do, and certainly not as much as I did before. But
Sure.
we just worked on a project that I hope to talk to you a little bit about. That where I was out there for most of 2 days, and yeah, it was pretty dirty.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as my son Alex learned when he worked for you, it's hard work. He learned that lesson so well that he didn't come back the next summer. He went off and did something else. So let's talk a little bit about the marketing side. What are some of the things you do to tell the story of your business, to connect with customers and prospects? How are you doing that? What have you learned about that? What are some of the challenges there?
Well, one of the things I've learned is that you really should hire a good agency like Asher to help you out, because you don't know nearly what you think you know.
This podcast brought to you by Laura Stine Gardens. Yes, yes.
right.
Well, thank you. We love working with good people.
One of the things that our business really lends itself to is that our work is visual work. So photographs really tell our story.
Yeah.
So social media is a big thing, and before and after photos. And so being regular on that, and I say that is always the goal.
Yeah.
Does that happen? Not that much.
Yeah.
When you got when you have a tiny company, you've got to figure out who's doing that
Yeah,
sort of
for
thing.
sure.
So, sometimes we're more consistent than others,
Yeah.
but that is far and away the best part of our marketing, and that's being able to tell our story and what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm sure where it's a visual product, there's also a lot that's very subjective. People will explain, here's my vision, and you must be looking at them, because we deal with some subjectivity here at Asher too. And I would guess that a lot of it is word of mouth, that you have a lot of referrals and folks
That's
who are eager to, because of the good work you do, point their neighbors, their friends in your direction. That's ultimately the best marketing there is. So hopefully you get a lot of that.
We do. A very large percentage of the work we have is word of mouth, and very simply, yard signs. Yard signs do a lot of our work for us, because people won't always look at a yard sign and say, oh, okay, I'll do that. But they will go talk to their neighbor, Bob, who has our sign in the yard, and Bob will tell them either yes or no.
Yeah.
So
It's a conversation starter.
it is.
Yeah.
It is. And oftentimes we will do a project in an addition, and then in a few weeks we've got 5 more there. So that's a really good experience.
So let's talk about some of the projects you're working on. You mentioned one. What are some of the things that are important to you right now that are either taking up a lot of your headspace, a lot of your time, or maybe small projects that you're just proud of? Some of the things that come to mind when you think of your to-do list right now, and hopefully your to-do list is getting a little shorter as we get into September.
It's really interesting. The projects that we love the most are the ones really where we can connect either with the homeowner or with the nonprofit or whoever it is, and our missions really kind of converge.
Yep.
So one we're very excited with, we just finished phase 1 on the master plan over at the Environmental Resource Center at Purdue Fort Wayne.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're working with Dr. Bruce Kingsbury and Samantha Thiessen, and they are taking their master plan is to take the landscape around the entire building and make it an kind of an educational outreach of sustainability for landscaping. So our first project was really fun. We took the downspouts from the building, and it's the old printing building on the northwest corner of the campus, so it runs right by the St. Joe River.
Yeah.
So we broke the tile on those and created this kind of meandering dry creek bed.
Okay.
So whenever it rains, we get water that comes through there. So it's not a continuous flow. But what it's meant to do is to slow the water up. We created some pockets for frogs and salamanders and turtles and things to use that space, and we will soon go in with some volunteers if anyone out there likes to plant plants. With some volunteers to put in lots of native landscape that we've designed for the areas. So that's a real meeting of the minds and of the missions.
Oh, sure.
So that one is particularly exciting.
Sure.
We're also working on one down by the Tin Caps ball field,
Okay.
which is very exciting. It's a townhomes of Brackenridge.
Okay.
And it's a rare commercial project we have, but we really connected to the homeowners there and are just having a lot of fun with that design.
And that's a pretty urban part of Fort Wayne.
It really
so
is.
how much real estate do you have to work with there?
So it's, you know what? I don't know the number of units. I'd want to say like 15 or 20. But really beautiful new homes down or condos down in the middle of Fort Wayne. And so it's really fun because of the angles. When you walk into the south side of the Tin Caps field, you can turn to the left and see all of them in the landscape in the front.
Yeah.
So we designed it that way. And my designer, Steve, had a big hand in this. He did kind of waves of plants like the rivers. And they were just little rectangles in front of each door. So it could have been rather boring.
Oh, sure.
But he took it and really made it into something that's just visually exciting. And we're excited about working downtown.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
That's different for us. And, downtown Fort Wayne now it's just a great place to be. The energy's good, and it's fun to be a part of any kind of thing down there that just enhances the design in an area.
Well, and great visibility for you, too. You're going to need to get really big yard signs for that project. So all the people going into Parkview Field are like, who's this Laura Stine Gardens? I must call them immediately.
A sheet and hang it on the building, something small.
Something very subtle like that. Yes. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about a few quick hit things that you've alluded to, but I want to dig into a little bit more. So you've built a successful business. You've been in very different positions in your career where you didn't know what you wanted to do. You knew that you didn't want to do what you were doing. You weren't sure, how this was going to all work out. In all that, if you were talking to one of your girls or anyone who was, just getting started thinking about careers, what's your best advice for building a successful, fulfilling career?
I think ultimately it has to be know yourself. So do that work.
Yeah.
Go to a counselor, talk to people, talk to your parents, talk to friends. I know now what I didn't know then, which is that I am intuitively connected to nature. So I can stand in a natural space and it will not take long before I can just visualize what a really beautiful and really useful planting would be there. And so when I say useful, I mean useful to nature, and I'm including people in that too. So useful to the people who live there, useful to the birds and the butterflies and the pollinators in that space. And so just learning who you are and what makes you tick.
Yeah, and knowing that what works for other people may not work for you, because when you're doing a job, like when you're in retail, you're going to be surrounded by a lot of people who think retail is the end-all and be-all. And a little bit of that is almost this sense of, I need to convince other people that this is the right thing to do, so I feel better about choosing this for myself.
Sure.
I experienced that with large organizations versus small organizations. It took me a long time to realize, okay, Asher's a team of 40. That works for me, but you get me with a larger organization, and I just can't do it. Number one, because I don't like bureaucracy. Number two, I don't like being told what to do. And number three, I like being able to walk down the hall and find people when I need something. But it took me a long time to figure that out. And I think that's part of what makes it great when you find it, is going through some of those things that help you get that self-awareness and starting to decide, okay, this isn't for me. I'm getting closer to what I really want to do.
And keeping in mind too that a job can be just a job, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You may find your fulfillment may be somewhere else.
Correct.
It may be like I am all in on my career and my work, and that I love that.
Yeah.
But for other people, a job can just be a means to an end on other things.
Yeah.
And that's, that's great too.
Yeah, well, and it also, your story kind of speaks to the importance, number one, of relationships. You never met Jeff, you probably wouldn't be doing what you're doing, or at least, it would look a little different. And the importance of volunteering, because I think you mentioned, one of your first entrees in this world was as a volunteer. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah,
right.
Sometimes that's where you can find something that you wouldn't find if you stayed on the traditional path that you thought was your destiny, so to speak. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, speaking of finding things and relationships, so when I say my first job was a job I hated, I also met amazing people at that job, including my wife, Tessa.
Yeah.
It was not a total loss.
Well, and I think people, need to understand that too. There's a job that I did for 10 months. If you look at my post-college resume, well, my Indiana resume, because I moved here when I was like 24, it's like 5 years at a job, 5 years at a job, 10 months at a job, 18 years at a job. And the job that I was at for 10 months, I'm still connected to some of the people I worked with. Just the work wasn't for me. It wasn't the people. They were nice people. They were smart people. So I think you can still take something away from it beyond just a cautionary lesson. You can take relationships away if you treat it well. And sometimes you can take really great relationships away. Okay, so next quick hit question. What's something about either your organization or the field you're in that you think deserves more attention, or maybe a myth that you want to clear up?
Maybe a couple myths. And that is that not all landscapers know their plants or are in it for their plants. I think as I grow with the company and I learn more about the field, there are some landscapers out there still planting invasive species. And they just don't know the plants and they don't know what's involved. And some, there are, of course, some landscapers who are just doing lawns and things, and that's good. We need that service. I kind of draw the line at, though, causing harm, right? So I always give the green light. If you see the nursery that you really love has burning bush, Bradford pears, feel free to kindly ask them to stop selling those things. They are harming the environment.
Do you think that is ignorance, or do you think it is profit comes first? We don't care about the long-term impact. We care about tomorrow's dollars.
I have yet to meet someone in the field who just really doesn't care. I'm sure it happens, but most of us in this field really like to be outside and really like nature. So I tend to think it's the former, that it's maybe, it's not really talked about.
Yeah. Well, and some of it is sometimes what customers want. And I say this as someone who's been one of your customers, isn't all that informed. It's kind of like, I like the pretty thing over there,
absolutely,
without knowing the potential impact of it.
Right. Because, we're entering into the season where you're going to start see burning bush turn red for fall. And it is gorgeous. It's just ending up in the woods and it's taking over.
So if you can make it as clear, you're obviously very well schooled in all this, but for someone who doesn't understand why that's a bad thing, why is it a bad thing that someone would buy, and I know it kind of explains itself, but why someone would buy an invasive species, why is that a bad thing?
So when you look at it, if I think on that continuum line, so there are plants that are native to our local region.
Yep.
Those are the plants that our local bird species, insect species, wildlife have for millions of years evolved with.
Yep.
So those insects can eat those leaves and it provides them with a chemical. And almost everyone knows the milkweed and monarch connection, right? So the monarch uses the poisons in the milkweed as a defense mechanism. And milkweed is the only thing that it can reproduce on.
They've evolved to thrive with this ecosystem. And and that's taken a long time.
It's taken a long time. And it's so most insects are what we call specialists. So like the monarch that can only use this kind. So we know that since the 70s, we've lost about 45% of the insects.
Oh, wow.
That's a huge.
Yeah.
So we want to grow those that our insects can reproduce on. So the other end of the spectrum are invasive plants that are almost always from another country. So they've kind of gotten loose here. So something like a burning bush. So, well, let's take the real thing, the ornamental pears. So they're planted everywhere, and they were innocently planted in, 70s, 80s, 90s. I can tell you, I had a very good pitch on why you should plant a Bradford pear.
Okay.
Because they were all the thing, and we did not know they were invasive.
Sure.
So I'm not going to tell you the story. You can Google why they got out, but they're out now. So they now produce seeds. The birds eat the fruit. They fly over Eagle Marsh. They drop them, and Eagle Marsh is full of these invasive trees. And so, the reason you don't want to plant invasives is they're getting into our wild areas, the Eagle Marshes, the Fox Islands, the woods, and they take over because they don't have any natural enemies here. And so then you don't get your wildflowers in the woods, and you have to, other things that grow here.
Fewer resources for the things that you want to thrive.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, thank you for indulging me in that explanation, because
that helped.
As someone who is a big fan of pretty things in nature, but whose ignorance, whose knowledge goes no further than that, it's helpful to know that, to stop and think, because, I think a lot of people just assume it's all the same. I'm going to, this plant is the same as that plant. It's all good. So, all right. Great explanation. Last quick hit question. In terms of a tool, a tip, a trick, a hack, something you use in your work, and it doesn't have to be marketing related, doesn't even have to be profound. What is something you use that you think would be helpful for people to know about?
I will give you two very useful things. One is very useful for learning, and one is not profound at all. You will be happy to.
Okay.
So the first one is go to indiananativeplants.org.
indiananativeplants.org. Okay.
And on that website, we are very lucky here in Indiana, in the state of Indiana, that we have this organization called the Indiana Native Plant Society. And a bunch of really smart people started it 25, maybe 30 years ago. And there's a fantastic website and it also has a little link to landscaping, and it will tell you what plants work well. It'll show you lots of photos. It is very informative on native plants for Indiana. Okay.
All right.
Tip number 2.
Yeah.
Sharpen your shovels.
Okay.
You'd be surprised. You will be surprised how much easier it is to plant if you sharpen that edge on your shovel. Okay,
and this is going to sound like another ignorant question, but what's the best way to sharpen a shovel?
I would take it to a sharpening service because you need a sharpening wheel to do that. You could do it with a hand tool, but do you have that hand tool at home?
No, absolutely not. I have very little at home. and very little that is useful in helping me do any manual labor.
Maybe this winter, if you plan on doing any planting next year, take it to a sharpening service and sharpen that edge.
All right. Okay. Well, that is kind of a metaphor for life, isn't it? Sharpen your shovels, people, and your life will be easier. Laura, if people want to learn more about you or Laura Stine Gardens, where's the best place for them to do that?
They should go to laurasteinegardens.com.
It's just that easy.
It is just that easy.
All right. Well, Laura, this has been super fun. It's been great learning your story. I think I knew pieces of it, but I never had heard it from the source. So this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for doing it.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been my pleasure.
And thanks, everyone, for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Asher Marketing Podcast. We'll be back next week with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us then.